Hello, good morning everyone, and welcome to another in our series of coffee breaks. This morning's we are fortunate enough to have Mike Ward, the Executive Chairman of Armalytix, with us. Source of funds is a huge issue in relation to the fight for EID and for firms to try and establish and ensure that they are actually transacting with the people that they think they're transacting with, and also that those funds that those people are producing in order to deal with transactions are legitimate funds. It's been a challenge for our sector for a long time, and I think what's really interesting about Armalytix coming into our sector is that they were primarily formed from a business, banking and finance background, and as such that in itself brings a new dimension to the problems that we have, and also the ways that things have been solved in the financial sector, introducing them within the legal sector. So good morning, Mike.
Good morning, Paul.
I think ideally, we just a little bit of background for everybody as far as your business is concerned would really help people, and then we'll just have a few questions highlighting the points that I think are most interesting as far as the lawyers are concerned.
No, that's great. Well, the firm was formed just over 2 years ago, I guess, and we're a regulated FCA, something called Account Information Service Provider, which is a bit of a mouthful, but basically it gives us the ability to read clients' bank data with their permission. We're held to various security standards as a regulated firm. But our backgrounds was really financial services. Indeed, that was where our first clients were. So it's interesting to look into the legal sector and see the parallels and maybe the differences too. In terms of our background in financial services, it has helped us in many ways in addressing the sort of some of the questions that the legal firms will ask us. And our background was all large banks. So, we came from firms such as Bank of America, Citigroup, HSBC. And I was tossing it up before this interview. It's sort of, we have over 100 years of experience together, I hasten to add, not individually, in financial services. So that's given an ability to sort of understand financial data in the variety of ways banks provide it. And I think also being hit with a lot of this regulation a little earlier than maybe some of the other sectors, we sort of understand the fundamental questions which can be asked in, for example, something like a source of funds check. Does the funds come from a legitimate source? And often the secondary question is, does the activity align with what you know about the client? I think that being said, in the legal sector, there are some very fundamental differences, and we need to be aware of that. And I think we were surprised when we first started doing the research was the amount of money being moved around the legal sector. These are in some cases quite frightening numbers even for a bank to look at. And then the checks involved to make sure there's safe and compliant transfer of money. So checks such as bank account verification, proof of funds, source of wealth. The number of times it's required was far higher than maybe we'd originally expected when we were first looking into the legal sector. And then I think the other thing we learned was financial services firms have very sort of pre-described, preordained sort of workflows certain times, which I think what we acknowledged in the legal sector was they needed a much more flexible and adaptable system, that each matter is different and the time when you might launch a check needs to be different. So I think there were parallels which we can bring to with our financial services background, particularly around the technicalities, but we need to understand that the workflows can be somewhat different for a legal firm.
Yeah, I mean, clearly we've got a lot of information going around about EID and the Land Registry Safe Harbour Agreement, giving them the ability to utilise the EID aspects, but quite a challenge for the law firms is how they identify source of funds, and probably almost more important than the ID aspect. And this is where I think that your system is really interesting from our perspective. How do you think that, from a source of funds perspective, that your system will aid law firms?
Yeah, So I think one of the things I have every sympathy for with a legal firm is firstly a collection of data. So if you look at the perspective of a bank, we tend to have a lot of the data at a bank. Whereas if you look at a lawyer, the first fundamental problem they have is they don't possess any of the data they need to do source of funds. They go out to their clients and collect it, and that could be in the form of a questionnaire initially, but then you need the financial data. And when I looked at it, it's just banks wouldn't be able to deal with how lawyers have to deal with the data they're providing. So you'll see such horror shows as sort of screenshots of mobile phones, sort of dog-eared bank statements, photocopies of bank statements, all of these sort of things. So the first challenge we set ourselves is, how do we get the lawyer the ability to collect the financial data they need to embark on a source of funds check? And with the advent of open banking, that has now provided the avenue for a lawyer to be able to go and check and get the data they need to commence a check. The other advantage is, once you get the data in a format which can be used and machines can deal with that data, you can then start working on more effective analysis of that data to give you the insights to start doing that check more comprehensively. I think, as I said before, within the legal sector, we learned that it needed to be flexible. So we needed to have a system which is capable of gathering information on both personal and business accounts. And we also learned it needed to be adaptable. So it was very tempting for us to go, oh, let's build an app. But the problem with apps is they have a very preordained workflow. And actually, what we embarked on instead was to say, let's get a system which doesn't require downloads of software, which is flexible enough for people to send those requests when they need it in relation to the matter they're in hand, and provides the analysis they really need to be able to get an insight of what's going on in those accounts, to answer those two fundamental questions about whether the funds come from a legitimate source and does the activity align with what I know about my client. So what we have today is a simple financial report tool. We cover 98% of personal and business accounts. Our reports are really simple and easy for clients to implement. So they don't need any software download, as I mentioned before. It can be, these requests can be embedded into an email. You can embed them into your case management software, or you can embed them into your KYC platform. So they're designed to be very easy to implement in whatever system you choose to use. And then for the clients, once they click on this link, I was counting it, and actually for a source of funds analysis report, I think it's 7 clicks to go from the original request to actually producing the report. And how the process works is the client would click on the link. It would be displayed what report the lawyer is looking for. They then connect one or many bank accounts from one or many banks. We then gather the data securely using open banking, and then we present the report they're going to share with the lawyer back to the client for them to be able to check. And then if they're happy to share it, is then sent via a secure link back to the lawyer for them to be able to review that report. And within that report, we produce graphs of total balances, large movements in and out, and also some financial metrics, which helps them, we hope, make the checks faster and more effective and efficient. I think the final thing is we made it easy for people to consume it. So you can buy the product directly from us. We will provide that tool, or you can go to KYC providers or case management systems. So for example, in April, we're launching our source of funds analysis with a firm called Verify, which I think is well known in the legal space. They do the KYC platforms for about 15,000 legal and accounting firms. So we're hopeful we're giving the legal sector what they need in order to do these checks more quickly and effectively.
Yeah, from our perspective in Legal Eye, we're excited about this because the source of funds aspect of identification and verification has always been a challenge for firms, and it is one that is for individual fee earners quite a challenge in communicating with their clients. Why do you think there is seemingly an increase on the focus of source of funds from all regulators?
Yeah, so I think that if you think from the regulator's standpoint, the first thing they did, and we've all been through this process, is around ID verification, PEPs and sanctions, so the sort of KYC onboarding journey. And the second thing they're now focusing is actually, even if people go through that onboarding journey, how does the money move through the system? So they need to try and stop the proceeds of crime and terrorism entering the system. And so they've gone through systematically the various industry groups to be more prescriptive of the checks we need to take. I mean, interest is probably not something will be widely known by necessarily the legal sector, but there was formed a group called the Wolfsburg Group, which was the 13 largest banks, and they were set with the task to research and give insights as the best way of effectively implementing source of funds and source of wealth checks. And then they report back to the various national regulators. So for us, it's the sort of NCA. And then in turn, the NCA then works with the industry regulators. So for the legal sector, with the LSAG group, so I guess there's a SRA, CLC, etc. And so now I think we're seeing the product of that with the new AML guidelines from the LSAG. And I don't think this is going away. So, I think these are incredibly important checks. And if they're all done perfectly, money would find it very difficult to move around the system if it came from an illegitimate source. I think there's still some way to go with that. But the other thing was we were really quite impressed with our conversations with the SRA and the CLC. So in the financial industry, regulators tend to be rather aloof and very difficult to reach. With the SRA and the CLC, whilst they were keen to stress that these obligations remain at their legal firms' obligations, they were very interested and very supportive around new technology to help those checks become more effective and more efficient. I don't think it was lost on them that these new rules do increase the burden on legal firms, and they needed to support new technologies to come to help make these processes, these rules workable in the processes the lawyers may have.
I think that's really important. I mean, we're looking forward to working with you with some of our firms as well and trying to help evolve the products with you. But where do you actually see source of funds going? And then as a consequence, how can we, as a group, your organization, help to support that development?
Yeah, so I was thinking about this, Paul, and I think the first debate is actually a really simple one in a way, but also probably quite complex, which is, when is the time you launch a source of funds check? So if I contrast maybe with the legal sector and financial services, so financial services, they have an advantage. They tend to have the money. Yeah? So they'll tend to do a source of funds checks when the money is ready to move to whatever matter is in hand. So source of funds checks are often launched quite late in a client journey or a client matter. But then when we looked in the legal space, a lot of these checks were done at the onboarding stage. And I can see why. There's a lot of advantages to that. You've got heavy interaction with your client. It's a time when they're most motivated to provide the information, etc. But it does present, quite interesting challenges. The first one is just an ease one, where if the money's already held in the client bank account, it's much easier to go there and work backwards, which is how a financial services firm, rather than if you're at the beginning where you've got a couple of challenges. So firstly, even for example, if a client presented you with a sort of an ISA statement or investment report, there's no guarantee that those assets were used to fund the client account, which then in turn comes to you. And then also there's a robustness problem that is, of course, you would end up having to do a lot of checks to check, well, okay, I can see your original evidence. Now I need to see that the money's arrived. And then do I check that money's actually the stuff which arrived in my client account, so to speak? So I think but I do acknowledge that the system needs to be flexible, that what works for financial services may not work for legal, but I think there will be a sort of quite healthy debate on when is the optimal time to do a source of funds check. And it probably won't be the same in every matter. I think looking further forward, we're going to be providing more analysis, and this is where feedback from the legal firms would be great in terms of the questions you're asked. So at the moment, we flag sort of large payments in and out. We flag repeating payments. We graphically represent these too. But I think there will be deeper questions around, what would the legal sector like to look at? Do you want to know sort of cash amounts moving out, whether they look normal or whether they're beyond what one would normally see, whether there's transfers out to outside bank accounts, and how do you want those sort of represented and shown. So I think there'll be work to be done on further analysis with working hopefully with some of your clients to sort of further deepen that. And then I think there's more a fundamental question, which is, at the moment, doing a source of funds check, it's quite an invasive procedure for our clients, yeah. And so typically we ask for 3 or 6 months bank statements, maybe 12. And I'm not necessarily convinced that all of that data needs to be available, at least on the first pass, for a source of funds check. And in actual fact, we should be doing some work around, does someone really, if I've got the analysis and I've got the transactions that do I really need all the accompanying bank statements? Do I need to know the shopping habits and where they shop and where they buy petrol in that first source of funds analysis? I'm not convinced it does, but I think it might take a bit of time for the industry to get comfortable that these type of analysis reports, at least for the first pass, give you enough information. And then the second pass, maybe you will need the statements, but it doesn't necessarily require first up. So I think in general, that sort of client privacy topic needs to be addressed as an industry. And actually, I think across all industries. And then finally, I think we've got this, I'm not sure if you've heard of it, but this concept of open finance. So open finance is the idea that consumers can connect the whole financial ecosystem. So this would be your pensions, your investments, your bank accounts, insurance, anything, and then they can sort of release the data out. And a lot of the fintech industry is very excited about this. And indeed, we sit on one of the parliamentary groups on this subject. I think there's lots of advantages around source of wealth and possibly into source of funds of having open finance. But I would say it's some way off. The technical challenges around financial services firms being able to provide this information means that, no one should be hanging their hat on this sort of data becoming available anytime soon. And in actual fact, we've got to work with the data we have available today, rather than hope we're going to get this panacea of financial data being released from customers with no paper involved.
No, I think it's a really exciting area, and I have to say that I think most firms will be really attracted by a solution that actually helps them practically and has some thought behind it about when the right time is to do these things and the depth, as you've just rightly said. So we're looking forward to being involved with this, and we're looking forward to seeing where you take it. Leaves just for me to say thank you for your time today, and for everybody. That's the end of another one of our coffee morning sessions, and we will be posting another one shortly. Thank you, Mike.
Thank you, Paul.